Alright. Hey, good morrow. It's that long 1 minute lead in, eh? Seems to be an interesting time of day. A bit later than I like to be for these sorts of things. You can hear the planes going overhead. Oh, the sprinklers are on. And the light's already out. For me, it's the light being out that's the real give. Alright. I do like a slow lead in. I briefly tried to have the microphone there on the cat. So I could hear it purring. It's a lovely sound, it does wonders for the heart. So yesterday's walk and talk, I used a different camera and it had a different stabiliser system. I found the footage to be, well, unusable. My partner was in bed beside me as I was trying to proof it. The tool itself was an OLED laptop, quite budget in nature, and it's unusual for me to proof my videos because I only really listen to them, these walk and talks, and proofing it on such a large screen. And there was a movie that came out a few decades ago. It was called The Blair Witch Project. It's one of those self-fulfilling prophecies of a movie that the buzz on the grapevine was that the lack of the lack of stabilisation or the handy cam footage, possibly filmed by amateurs, led to a lot of nausea or can't say motion sickness. There was legitimately a lot of vomiting that happened in the cinemas, and so therefore when you went in you had that nice acidic smell. It kind of set you up to feel the same way. And one of the things I've noticed with regards to the lack of stability of footage is that the bigger the screen, the more impacting it can be. So I was watching yesterday's video on I don't know, it was probably like a 14-inch screen versus typically I'd scan it on a much smaller tablet or possibly a phone screen. Anyway, I had managed to get down to a tree, just down around this corner here. I'm coming back today. Take two, if you will. Second verse, same as the first. And to that I say not at all. You might detect there's an absolute lack of direction in my conversation thus far. And that's quite on purpose. It's kind of hard to channel nothingness, to be blank, to genuinely not let the aspects of the morning that have already happened get into one's forefront of the mind. I mean, it was extra hard because normally I make coffees for the family after I get home from these videos, just due to the nature of the particular day in the week, a little bit of an earlier start. Some household members and I made a couple of coffees before I left this morning, but I don't like to drink caffeine. I've seen there's a new scientist article, I think it's called Spiders on Drugs. Great imagery. It shows the webs that are built by these particular spiders after being given a range of different drugs, and it's quite insightful. Now obviously the physiognomy of a spider might not be equivalent to that of a human being. You know, we don't know the dosages they were given, again, versus their physiognomy and the effects it might have. But such an amazing... you look at some of the drugs and how it affects them, and you're just like, wow. And you're like, some of them you're like, I want that drug. Whatever that is, what does that do? And then others, you're just like, I wouldn't put that in my body in a million years. And one of the worst offenders, I would argue, was caffeine. And ever since then, I never had an interest growing up for coffee at all. And I find it interesting to have a partner that's big on coffee. I had a stage in my life where I got into coffee. Now please excuse me, I am recording in high dynamic range, but I find the monitor is out washing areas that I'm sure are actually in focus, in capture. And so I'm actually exposing too dark. But I also set the screen brightness lower. I was doing a long video tech support one yesterday where I was filming for hours. The battery ran out. First time ever on this camera, the battery ran out. But I was aware it was going to be a long recording, and I'd actually darkened the screen prior to the recording in the hope I would extend the battery life. My apologies there. I actually, for a moment, had a direction I was possibly willing to go in for today's video. But I guess we can argue that a large part of being directionless, it's hard to be that free. And this morning when I was making those coffees, the little bit of caffeine that was on my finger, I like to make a thermos bottle up for one family member. It saves them buying flavoured coffees from companies that literally post them across the country. I don't understand why it is that local coffee shops can't have a product in the local market. Surely refrigerated transport of a heavy liquid across the country must at some level be cost ineffective, but what we generally find is that a few of the beverage companies around the planet own most of what is sold in shops. And therefore they have the fridge network and the supply lines and the structures in place to get these things out at such fiercely competitive prices that I guess they might be hard to compete against. But in a way to improve the flavour or quality of what is being drunk, I'm now making a really nice thermos cup each morning for cold beverage. But in the nature of doing that, I've probably poured 4 coffee shots this morning. And I don't know, maybe I'm a bit of a messy chef, but for whatever reason I had some crema on my finger and just sort of automatically just put it in my mouth. And it's the exact opposite of what I wish to do before these videos, where I would argue I generally try to meditate or do some breath work or something to still the mind, just to be present, not to let... The discussion is that whatever the forethoughts are of the day before, which haven't redressed themselves through sleep or are clearly so important to me that I would wake up today and the next day and still want to carry on thought about them. We could say it's a therapy, but in the morning I like to make them a discussion point. And it's fair to say in the tech world there's lots of things that I experience on a day-to-day basis that I would argue I'm genuinely venting. I feel I need to vent about. What we find with energy flows where attention goes, when we vent, we're kind of putting ourselves back in that situation. We're reliving it at some level, and unless we've got a mind, unless it's an automatic process of catharsis where we actually do release upon revisiting said pain, if we haven't developed a strong, vigilant mental will to actually push through these things, to make progress and to punch out the other side, really what we're doing is we're just subjecting ourselves back to the pain and somewhat pointlessly. So I don't do these videos so I can be a better person to the people in the community around me. They're genuinely not just meant to be a therapy video. I guess we could hear in the tone of my voice there that I have concerns about that. But it's true that if I expected viewers to eventually find I guess it's becoming a discussion channel on technology. Its real basis is in being a conscientious consumer, just living more harmoniously with the planet. And what I've noticed, the same with in an early life, where I wished very much to be a a Christian missionary. And I found that the discussion point where people's eyes generally rolled over when it comes to religion is basically just bringing up the topic, so like I just have. And it's the same with regards to being a tech evangelist, when you've got one foot clearly in the I love the planet / environmental camp, is that in most of those circles, the very nature of technology is a taboo word. Now, of course, it isn't. We all need technology, and technology itself, I mean, that's anything from a humble water wheel to, basic capturing of wind or making the elements work for us. We'd be mad not to, right? The ox before the cart is technology. The wheel that the cart, is motion is made easier by sound engineering principles. It's all technology. We love technology. The argument is it makes our lives easier. The reason I do this channel is that I find that we're skirting on the verge of humour by the nature of pretending that technology, in its modern form, the ones we subscribe into that are high value, are certainly not as the time-saving devices that we've been led to believe they are. And there's parallels in this all through human history. The nature of the Industrial Revolution being that the concept is that we will work less hours in our lives. We'll have more disposable or free time. And all my life I've worked on a vision that was, I believe, given to me in the 90s. I'd argue I was somewhat of a child, but then I argue that children are still very much into their 20s, and even approaching the 30s, people can still be children of the earth, maybe. And so I'm going to shoot into the sun for a bit, check out this high dynamic range, let's see how it works. Oh, okay, my bar goes yellow when I'm fitting it all in. Got it. So I can open that up a bit. Lower that down a bit. Oh, I like it. Maybe. So, having, I believe, experienced a concept of how we could all live harmoniously, A, with each other, and B, with the planet, all live harmoniously, right? I have often tested that model against, I guess, whatever the world throws at me in terms of politics or just, whenever there's a technological evolution of some sort, how it might fit into the model. And it all has. Like, it's just amazed me that as someone that likes to play both sides of a fence and always try to find fallacy in my own arguments, certainly, I have been amazed that, as I say, it was a model gifted to me. I don't believe I'm intelligent enough to conceive such a thing. And it was just that I found myself living in said world for such an amount of time that I could take note of the systems and the things that were key to it in terms of bringing it about in the world that we live in. Not the dreamland, if we will. Now, it's all fun and, you can say, oh, that's just the rantings of a mystic. A mystic, by definition, is a holistic spiritualist, and that very much fits with my missionary bent as a young child. That I sort of picked up the book by Houston Smith, which is called The Religions of Man, and it compares and contrasts the 8 major religions of the world. It's pretty easy to see that 7 out of 8 of them have pretty much the Trinity. Like they conceptually have much of the same things in place. And that I think Buddhism is the only one that doesn't technically have a trinity per se, but it has the inner, the outer, and the other, which when you, as a practitioner or an experiencer of any given religious practice, we would find that they probably can be used in the same way that a Western religion might have use for its Father, its Son, and its Holy Ghost, or whatever it is your flavour of the Kool-Aid, if you will. I'm very much a believer in faith heals, and I do certainly believe that the nature of putting ourselves at the mercy of something bigger, the nature of a divine presence, or an implicate structure, I guess, if you will, that might be have more use for us than we can conceive with our limited monkey brains. We don't really know it all, and sometimes it's nice to just be able to let go and trust. Again, come down to faith. It's been shown faith heals, right? Even if, placebos heal, so you could argue any which way you want. The value of religion is often those of the communal needs, society. And even if that was the full limit of what it had to offer, then a set of rules that we all subscribe to works for us. We know this when we drive down the road. We expect the cars to drive on a particular side of the road. It works for us, right? If it didn't, if we lived a little bit more chaotically, we'd live randomly less. And that's a given. So the nature of having a community that's pro-community and understands how to prop each other up, how to meet the needs that are societal. And when studying psychology, I found it was Maslow. Abraham Maslow was an interesting fellow who was a humanist. And the humanists were the first branch of psychology that seemed to evolve that had a real positive bent. And so Maslow himself came up with this concept of the hierarchy of needs, the basis being that if we met our needs, we might actually actualise as a being and be able to move on to better and greater things. And so that's sort of how I see my life, as the failure to launch. But anything on will or just being successful basically says, if you build it, they'll come. You got to kind of be living it. You can't just expect it to be there tomorrow. My uncle used to have a beautiful saying, still probably does. Don't know, don't care in terms of finding from him words of wisdom. But one I took in my early years from him was, I was an overnight success. It just took me 20 years to get there. And I certainly feel that I live my life that way. But I'm ready to move forward. I've got a partner that probably doesn't need to work as hard as, as a family unit, we probably don't need to work so hard on a daily and weekly basis. We'd like some stability going into our later life. We've probably trusted in the universe or in our families. In the case of our families, we've been highly ripped off. So an unloving universe with a random, chaotic order. What is it? Entropy. Everything's just going any which way, falling apart even. It's probably better than the constructive takedowns of family members, specifically on my partner and I, where we've both lost arguably our inheritance or our income. My partner as a teenager was paying off an apartment in a very ritzy area that they never lived in, and sold that to support their mum in later life, to allow the mum to move out to the country where the lack of germs for a sickness that the mum had had, it was going to prop up and prolong the life more than the doctors were saying, and it did for decades. But the family then just absorbing the property from her, my partner. So we lost, that was her life lost, now in her 50s and working hard still as a cleaner, as she was as a teenager. And the same for myself, that I had a tech background and I really wanted to throw that in with Windows 10 coming out being such an anti-consumer thing. And I just realised that for the same reason I'd never become a lawyer. I didn't want to surround myself with deeply unhappy people, and probably didn't want to go down the medicine path because of the requirement of constant study in the same way that law sort of requires that. I'd like to think at some point that we could stop having to learn, even though my dad, right up to her final days, was every day's a school day. If I've always said to my child growing up that would be our family creed, if we had one, it would be every day is a school day. But in terms of trying to do something better with our lives, I guess finding myself back in the camp of supporting computers is deeply doesn't really bring joy. So even if we focus on the gaming side of entertainment, I find that doesn't bring joy, and it's more the frustrations It's that for the masses of the world, the low socioeconomic zones, the consoles are the things that should prove the best in terms of value for money, bang for buck for entertainment. And the notion being is that the hardware that's set in them have chipsets that, when the features of the chips are written for, the value that you get in terms of capability from the chips is top tier, it's the best it can be. So usually it takes a software team several releases of said software of said platform before they get really good at the tricks. And so in the PC video card space that doesn't happen, right? All sorts of new technologies come to market, but it can be 4 or 5 years before software comes out that uses the features of any given chipset. And that's just always been the way it has been. Now, you can say there's a few paid-for tech demos out there that squeeze features in a bit sooner rather than later, but it certainly isn't the way the industry goes, and certainly not within the affordability of the world's masses. Not even 1% of people who buy into digital entertainment would be supporting said products. So they're the anomaly, if you will. They're the outside looking in. But the consoles, with their long lives and stable platforms, that is, any console in a non-Microsoft ecosystem, all the rest of the consoles, like Nintendo and Sony, have long hardware lives, and developers can get really masterful at programming for them. And even if a new platform comes out, there's still north of 100 million people on the prior platforms. That if you want to sell to 100 million people for stable hardware, you can actually write and use the hardware tricks that are required to squeeze everything out of said platform. And generally you will sell well when you do something amazing because you figured out hardware tricks. And so that side I find amazing. That's always been inspirational. I like to see human excellence where optimisation happens, right? I think that represents our best. But in the last 7 or 8 years, because of one particular hardware player performing so poorly, has actually enforced that most of their teams work for a de-optimisation process. That everybody, it's not that they do their best for what the tools they have, it's more that they target the competitor's platform and then put in tricks to try to trip things up. And an easy example is a couple of years ago some new consoles launched, and one of them had a very, very budget solid-state drive system and a very budget PC build. And it did the standard thing of consumers are interested in numbers. And so it's easier, if you've ever gone to the shops and looked at a budget SSD and a Pro SSD, the budget one costs half as much for the same amount of size. So one of the console makers went, we're going to put in a Pro SSD, meaning we're going to spend a lot of money on performance parts, and that will cost us more, and hence the size of the drive will have to be less. Whereas the competitors went, no. Consumers read spec sheets, we'll play the numbers game. And so there was potentially a 4 times speed difference between the drives. Technically it was only a 2 times speed difference, but Microsoft out the gate got their engineers to quote stats to say, oh no, we can achieve that 5 gigabits per second speed. To which the Sony engineers responded, well, if we're using those sorts of metrics to quote, like basically using then software decompression to assist, CPU decompression to assist the hardware that's there, we can achieve closer to 20. Like, how misrepresentative do you want to be? But the culture that puts out the performant part is a very humble culture, and they don't over talk. They like to under promise and over deliver. Whereas the Western media is all about over-promising and misrepresenting using statistics. And so that's exactly what happened coming to market, was everyone's like, but this part should be 20% more performant. It's the full blah, 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 blah. And everyone else is like, well, no, the other one is the blah, blah with a scalpel attached to it, where it's been optimised for gaming, and it's got all sorts of considerations performant to the one task it has to do. And so aspects that are in the full blah, 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 which belongs in the PC space so that you can do absolutely anything with the hardware, is not needed in the console space. It would be better to have a more optimised silicon targeting the specific task it's doing. And of course then you get journalists in sort of both camps. Well, more so journalists. 9 out of 10 journalists are paid for easily in the camp of the braggers. And they would be like, well, no, you need the mesh shaders, you need these things. And it's like, well, do you? Because unless your programming teams are going to put the effort in it, unless you're going to keep that hardware in the market for a long time and they're going to put out Generation 2, Generation 3 titles and learn the tricks and optimise for it. The reality is, if you're not using those things, all of the so-called performance you're quoting and touting that you've got there just won't work for you. Whereas the competitors had quite legitimately put in silicon that basically auto-optimises itself, so people don't need to go to any extra work to squeeze the most out of it. And we saw it right from the first batch of titles that came out. But if software was written from the ground up to use said silicon, which we're now hitting that time in the generational lives of hardware that should be happening, it'll start to perform really well. And we see that. We see Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 has just come out. It's an open world game, generally the hardest genre to make run on any silicon. And the base PS5 model is way more performant than the top of the line Xbox could do it. And if you're just looking at the frame rate, it's very misleading, because the PlayStation 5 Pro actually has less frame rate in a lot of scenes if you put them in the performance mode. But then it's running the quality graphics, not the cut down graphics to allow it to achieve 60 frames a second on the consoles that had come out before the Pro console. And then if you're looking at the actual resolution counts, you go, well, it's kind of lower. And it's like, yeah, but the upscaler it's using is so much more precise. And if you look at static shots, it doesn't show it, right? So at every level, statistical and marketing, unless you've got journalists who are being honest about what's really going on, it's very easy to have the wool pulled over your eyes. And because Microsoft and its partners, its press partners, are all trying to bury what is the best value for money in digital entertainment, which is the PlayStation 5 Pro, they just don't, they're not honest. They don't go, oh, look, when you actually look at that static shot, yeah, the resolution doesn't look particularly good, but if you look at it in motion, you'll actually see that there just beats out everything else so substantially, that we can't just represent these things with low quality internet download footage or static screenshots, and that when you experience the total package, which can come down to the sound renderer and can come down to the controllers and all sorts of things, there literally is just no competition. But when you have an ecosystem that's given long support life cycles, it gets exciting to technologists like myself, who you've typically always been in the PC camp. The reality is that across a handful of titles that I've been testing, they can't touch what the console's doing. Sure, they can technically brute force outrender them, maybe. But then you look at all the issues that you have on a daily basis to make said platform work, and just how quickly any of it can be revoked or taken away from you. And then you're paying 2 to 3 times the cost, and then you're also paying for your time. And there's just no counter-argument. There's no, but the digital stores sell things cheaper in the PC space. And it's like, well, a little bit, but there's always digital sales also on the console space. And if you want to get into the semantics then of the value of software, the nature of being able to buy things physical, which have resale value and the ability to loan to your friends, that's just a whole can of worms unto itself. And then you get other people arguing, oh no, but there's an annual network cost. And it's like, yeah, but then there's so much less cheating in the games because there's an attached cost of ownership to the title that people don't, A, don't hack their systems, and B, don't risk the easy wipe out of their account. And for any which way you argue, there's always the counter-argument. But the journalists aren't being fair, and techies like myself get frustrated because there's someone that is agnostic to the technology and just tries to appraise it for the value to the planet, which is we need long hardware lives. We need things that aren't, destined for the scrap heap. We need things that are built to last. And then also we can argue the economics of power. So with a power supply on my computer with the value of a PS5 console, and it lowers my cost per hour in terms of watts. And I genuinely cannot touch at 3 times the build cost the equal power of a PlayStation 5 Pro console. So in every way, consoles are the environmental win for the planet. Well wishes with you.